Well, thank you for having me tonight. I'm going to talk about a half hour about the history of the Morris Canal and how it influenced this area and its influence and connection to rivers, which you guys are interested in. So the story of the Morris Canal starts in 1822. It starts with a man, probably a lot of you are familiar with George McCulloch, Morristown, McCulloch Hall, very wealthy businessman. And legend has it that in 1822, he was fishing on what we know today as Lake Apacon. And he came up with this idea of using the headwaters from Lake Apacon to feed a canal, build a canal across northern New Jersey. Now, why did we need a canal? Well, let's look at what Mr. McCulloch says. He goes, the mouth of the Musconetcong is close to inexhaustible mines of coal, which could be afforded in New York so cheap as to not only exclude Liverpool coal, but also wood, which grows daily dear. And for this reason, it would be instead of any other fuels and distilleries, manufacturers, steamboats, etc. So to kind of unpack that a little bit, what he's saying is, we have this need for fuel in New Jersey. Why? Well, one of the reasons is the big iron industry here. Now, you guys might be familiar with the Whippany. We had the Whippany River at the Jacob Ford iron forge. But before you get to the forge, you have to smelt the iron in furnaces. They take a lot of fuel. And the fuel used up at that time was wood, but it was being depleted. So if we get into a time machine and go back 200 years, all the wooded areas around here would have been wide open fields. So we were running out of wood, we needed another source. And we had it, and that was this stuff, anthracite coal. But anthracite coal wasn't in New Jersey, it was out in Pennsylvania. So we needed a way to transport it from PA into New Jersey. Now, what Mr. McCulloch says is, well, we have three choices. We build the canal, we continue using wood, which is grown daily here, or we use Liverpool coal. Where's Liverpool? Well, we know from the Beatles, that's in England. So he's talking about importing coal from Europe. What he doesn't say is transporting the coal by road. And that's because transporting cargo by road 200 years ago was so inefficient. It was actually easier to ship it 3,000 miles across the Atlantic Ocean than to truck it 100 miles from Pennsylvania. Seems incredible, but that was the fact back then. So that was what drove the building of canals in the early 19th century. So first question we'll ask, how are they going to fund this? Where's the money going to come from? Mr. McCulloch really wanted the state of New Jersey to fund it. State of New Jersey said, no, we want nothing to do with it. So his partners formed a private company, it was called the Morris Canal Banking Company. It was incorporated in 1824, and they sold 2 million shares of stock, which was the initial fund to build the canal as it first was. 2 million today wouldn't even pay for the plans, but that was enough back then to fund it. So it was successful in funding the canal. It also caused Mr. McCulloch to disassociate himself with it. Why? Well, he didn't want the canal to be owned by a bunch of speculators. And he didn't want his name associated with anything called a banking company. A lot of wealthy men back there didn't like banks, thought they were evil, thought they were no good. So even though George McCulloch is considered the father of the Morris Canal, he was only involved the first few years, then he backed out. Financially, that's was very good idea, good smart plan, because the 100 years that the Morris Canal Bank Company was around, it only made a profit for a few years during the 1860s. So next question, which you guys are more interested in, is the water. So I mentioned that Lake Apacon was the main water source. And if you're familiar with Lake Apacon, you're probably familiar with this picture on the right. That's what Lake Apacon looks like today. It is not what nature gave us. Nature gave us what you see on the left, of two much smaller bodies of water. What's the lower lake today, everything below this point, was this pond. It was called Muscatecon Pond. It's also called a Pacon Pond or a Great Pond. And this much smaller body of water, Little Pond, which became the Upper Lake. So to put this in perspective, Brooklyn Ferry there, which was the site of a ford, is actually what is today Hapathan State Park, which is located right there. So they dammed this river, they dammed the lake rather, and it rose at 5 feet. And that actually connected these two bodies of water and created the Lake of Pacon we know of today. And you see it has many coves. Now you may have heard of Pacon is a Lenape word meaning lake of many coves or honey water many coves. That is incorrect. Doesn't translate that way. And most of the coves you see today didn't exist with the native people. So it wouldn't make sense at all. In addition to Lake of Pacon, Lake Muscatecon, Cranberry Lake, Bear Pond, and Greenwood Lake are all reservoirs that are created for the Morris Canal. In addition, the canal parallel rivers all the way across the state. Muscatecon River, Rockaway River, Passaic, Pompton, Ramapo all had relationships with the Morris Canal and served as source water. The Whippany River did not have a relationship with the canal. Why not? We'll talk about that in a minute. So it's November 4th, 1831. So just 2 days ago was the anniversary. First trip was made Newark to Phillipsburg. Now at that point, the canal started at the Delaware River. It only went to Newark. Took another 5 years to complete the canal to Jersey City, so that Delaware River was connected to the Hudson River. Why 5 years to go that short distance? Because of this thing we have here. That's called an elbow. So when they're digging this canal, they're doing it by hand. They don't have any surveying equipment. So they're digging and digging and digging. They hit bedrock. They got to find their way around it. They hit bedrock here and go all the way down to the northern border of Bayonne and back up to get to Jersey City. What did they hit? Well, if you're familiar with the Palisades Cliffs up north, that actually continues underground. It's called the Palisades Ledge. That's what they hit. And they had to find their way around it to get to Jersey City. So it was 5 years later, 1836. Now you connect Delaware to the Hudson River. You can now not only transport coal to the cities in the east, like Newark, Paterson, Jersey City, but now you have access to the Hudson River. You can go upriver and you can connect to the Erie Canal and the canals up north. So at the bottom here, we see all the counties and towns where the canal went through. Why did it go through Morristown? You would think it would, because George McCulloch is so involved in the beginning. They did have a plan to go to Morristown. And one of the plan was to come through Morristown and then end up at Elizabeth, which is down here. That didn't work. And the problem in part is because of the Whippany River. If the canal went through Morristown, it would most certainly have utilized the Whippany River. The Whippany River goes northeast out of Morristown, northeast out of Morristown, Elizabeth and Southeast. So as you make your way from Morristown to Elizabeth, there wasn't enough water sources, so it would have simply ran out of water. So they made this more northern route. Here you see the main feeder from Lake Pacon. Then there was the second feeder. This was called the Pompton feeder. 5 miles long, went from Wayne Township, an area called Mountain View, all the way up to the dam section of the Ramapo River. But the water that was from the Ramapo came from Greenwood Lake. So that big long Greenwood Lake that sits on the border of New York and New Jersey, that was a water source for the Morris Canal. And it fed it down and then allowed it to be fed all the way to the Hudson River. So when the Morris Canal opened, it was part of a whole network of canals. There are two that cross New Jersey. Those are the ones were kind of under the our auspice. The Morris Canal, and then there's the Delaware River, and that went from Trenton to New Brunswick on Red Bay. A lot of the coal came out of this area, Monchon. Today we know that as Jim Thorpe. Came down to Lehigh, to Easton. If it was going to Newark, Jersey City, New York, they would come across here and go to across the Morris. If it was going down to Trenton, New Brunswick, or, farther down, it would come down the Delaware Division, come to the DNR and go across this way. So that's the cold network of canals, transportation, just like roads are connected, today. How long did it take? The canal boats move very slow, 2-3 miles an hour. So there was one trip we wrote about in the newsletter. Long chunk up to Elmira, New York today, about a 2.5 hour drive. Back then, the whole trip would take you a month. Down we got eastern across the Morris Canal, up the Hudson River to the Erie Canal, down the Erie, and then down a series of canals to Binghamton, Elmira. So it was very, very slow transportation. That's why it didn't last forever. Now, there's a big challenge with building a canal across northern New Jersey, and that's what we know today as the Highlands. Next meeting, you're having the Highlands Coalition, so obviously you learn a lot about the Highlands, but it's northwest section of New Jersey. That's very mountainous. It's part of the Appalachian Mountain chain. I live up on Schooley's Mountain, which is right there. So I went out of state and I said, "Hi, I'm from New Jersey. I live on top of an Appalachian Mountain." They look at me like crazy. Well, that's true. So the canal had to cross the mountains. And when Mr. McCullough conceived of this canal, he had no idea what he was getting into. He made an estimate, if we cross northern Jersey, we're gonna have to come about 300 feet in elevation. He was way off. The whole elevation change is 1,674 feet. Tide waters to the summit Lake Pacon is 914 feet, 760 feet to the Delaware Valley. Oh my God, this had never been done before. How do you build a canal that goes across mountains? At this point, they're on the hook. They sold the stock, they had to build a canal someplace. So they had to figure out how to do this. And they overcame the elevations in 2 ways. Now, the first way is pretty common, locks. Most canals have locks. The DNR has locks. The Lehigh Canal has locks. Almost any canal you go to has locks. They're a pretty simple operation. 2 walls, you have gates on each end. Boat goes in, you close the gates, like the valves in the upper lock. To let water in the raise boats up, you let water out the lower canal, lower the boats down. And locks were good for overcoming 10, 15 feet in elevation. The deepest on the Morris Canal was 17 feet. And here's just a couple photos. If you want to see historic photos of the Morris Canal on their website, we have a whole archive. You can look at hundreds and hundreds of photos. But here's just a couple. The first one up top is a boat going through a lock, Morris Canal boat. This is Lock 2 East in Wharton, the only preserved, totally restored lock we have. You can see the whole operation. Here's the lock tender. He's opening up the valves. Here's the captain. He's bringing a feed bucket for the mules to feed them. There's the mules looking at dissipation, and a couple young ladies here. We don't know what they're doing, or whether they're captain's daughters or they're just passersby. But you can see it's very tight fit. The boats are 91 feet by 10.5 feet. The locks were 95 feet by 11 feet, just inches on each side. And this was a typical lock operation. On top of the cabin, you see this white object. We'll learn what that is in a little bit. And the lower one, this is a Ledgewood, and this is a work scow, which is just a smaller boat that's making its way through the lock, and that's Main Street back. So Ledgewood changed a lot. It's very good old back then. Now it's very dull. So locks were good for overcoming 10, 15 feet elevation. What happens if you have to overcome 90 feet in elevation? You can do this. It's called a fly locks. It's where you have locks like steps, lock and lock and lock and lock. And it works, like this one in England, but logistically it's problematic. Well, if you have to overcome 90 feet, you need 9 locks. It takes you 10 minutes to get to each lock. That means it's going to take you an hour and a half to overcome that 90 feet. Climbing over the highlands, you're going to be hitting all kinds of big elevation changes like that. So hour and a half here, an hour here. That's gonna add a lot of time to your trip across the state. The boats are traveling 2-3 miles an hour, so it's a long trip anyway. So this wasn't a very good solution for the Morris Canal. They had to come up with another one. Now, this picture, by the way, is from England, the Canal. 29 locks, 237 feet. It takes more than 5 hours to go from the big bottom to the top. So that gives you an idea of how slow that locked flights are. So I came up with a different solution, and that was the use of inclined planes. Inclined planes were used on the Morris Canal, first place anywhere in the world. We talk here in the United States, a lot of things from Europe, a lot of things from Asia. This is the one thing they copied from us. It was also the only one in the United States. And the way the inclined plane works is you have a hill with railroad tracks on it. The boats go into the cradle and water power pulls the boats up and down the hill. Now, if you look at this diagram, this was the original design. It used a big water wheel like you see in the mill. That worked okay, but it only pulled boats up to about 20 tons total. Once you got into the 1840s, we're now in the Industrial Revolution. Demand for coal and other products, iron ore, all these things that were transporting boats became very big. So they had to hit the reset button and redesign the canal. They enlarged it, they enlarged the locks, they also totally redesigned the inclined planes. So what you see in the middle, this is a design that lasted till the end. This is what you see, the remnants of the inclined planes today. Instead of having a big water wheel, they had what was called a Scotch turbine, 20 feet underground. This is up the back on State Park. That's a surviving turbine. That's me. See how big it is. The water came from the upper canal down a tube called a penstock, and the enormous force of water and gravity go underneath, turn that big turbine. That would turn this wheel here, and that pulled boats up and down. So you see this diagram, this photo up here. This is a boat going up a plane in blue. So here's a couple more photos. The top one shows the boat. It's floated into the cradle, just like you put a boat on a trailer. You get the turbine going. Now it's starting its trip up. The photo on the bottom, this is a mooring plane 5 East, and that's kind of what I call a captain's eye view, where you're looking down the cradle, down the plane. That's what you would see going down. This is the powerhouse, so that's where the big wheel and the gears were to operate. So the inclined planes, they overcame elevations from 33 to 98 feet. You add it all up, compare it to using flights of locks, it saved more than 18 hours of travel time across the state.
Are the boats totally flat bottom?
Yes, boats are all flat bottom. Correct. So when the Morris Canal started using inclined planes, engineers came from all over the world to look at this new technology and to utilize it. And they started using inclined planes in other places around the world, Europe and Asia. There are no functioning inclined planes in New Jersey or in the United States because the Morris Canal was abandoned. There is one in Poland. This is the WRWAC Canal. They built inclined planes using our technology, and they still function. So if you take the trip to Poland, you can actually ride a boat up and down inclined plane. The gentleman who's the head of the organization here, back in 2019, made a journey, made a pilgrimage to New Jersey, went all the way across the state to see all 23 sites of the inclined planes to see where it all began. Did a program for us. He didn't speak a word of English. He needed a translator. Yeah, I think he said 5 times the police were called up. He's big, apparently kind of dangerous looking guy. Yeah, so now he was able to talk the way out of it, never got arrested. So that was interesting, learning about the old Black Canal.
Who came up with the idea of the inclined plane?
It was an engineer called Ephraim Beach, kind of developed it all, yeah. So every plane, so we had 23 inclined planes, we had 34 locks. So that's 57 different places where these were used. Here's your heat up.
Right, everybody, it's been a lot of miscommunication from headquarters.
You.
Thank you so much. Have a good evening.
Go ahead.
Okay, you want to wait properly? Alright, so every lock, every plane had a tender. And that was someone or a family who was on call. Sunrise to sunset, 6 days a week to, tend the lock and tend the planes. They were paid very little money, but they were provided a house to live in all year round, so they have free housing. The house you see at the bottom, this is modern picture. Wood block, 2 east, the only way they installed, Tender's house on the Morris Canal. We have opens, Morris County runs Pathways District 2 times a year. We have this open, so just a few weeks ago it was open, it'll be open again in, May. But you can go to, U Park anytime and see it on the outside. The top photo shows Lock 2 West outside the Stanhope. That was also called Fluke's Lock, and it was an all-female lock. Mr. Fluke actually ran a work scout. He left his wife and 4 daughters to operate the lock. That's a Fluke daughter. What she's doing there is the upper gate of the lock is called a drop gate. What that means is when the water is lowered in the lock, the pressure holds it closed. Once you have equal levels on both sides, just give it a little nudge with that pole and it'll fall down and go on its way. Now, on the boat, when we saw the photo of the boat going through Lock 2 East, I said there was a white object. And that's this. All canal boat captains carry conch shells. Now, the reason they do that is if they're approaching a locker in a Klein plane, they want them to know they're coming. They don't want to have to wait. So about a half mile before they do this. There you go. Everyone out loud just go, what is that? So if you were a tender and you heard that sound, you stop what you're doing, you gotta out there to help the boat through, because you don't want to salt the canal boat after that. If anybody live in that house? Yeah, it's just for show. It was actually the borough of Wharton that paid to have it restored. Our thing is we furnished the whole time, we collected all this stuff, so. It's a great house, it has lighting, it has climate control. One thing it doesn't have is any plumb, so you can't go to the bathroom there, but otherwise, it would be a great place to live.
Where is it?
It's called Forest Park in Wharton. If you put that in GPS or, West Central, and it's a very nice site. It's one of the longest watered section of canal, very few watered sections. So you can walk around along a beautiful watered section. And then you get there, you can see the lock, you can see the house, so it's definitely, it's worth it. It's about only a 30-mile walk.
And the lock actually works or it's just there?
And well, it does function. The problem is there's no water in the upper, so you can't raise boats and up and down. The 4 gates, which are minor gates, they go like that, they're actually stuck in the ground. So we want to get them cleared out so we can open and close it. Now, that would be, cool for that.
Do you have a guess how often a boat would come through? Are they busy?
It depends on the period of the canal's history. In the 1860s, in its heyday, you might have 100 boats a day coming through. Now, the photos you see in these kind of presentations, they were all, most of them are either very late 19th century or most of the first 10 years of the 20th century. That's when the canal was almost done. So it would be very rare, like if you saw 1 boat a day. And that's why they were photographed, because it's a big deal. Wow, boat's coming through, let's take a picture of this. It's not gonna be around. Then there was a 10-15 year period where the canal was still there, but the boats weren't really operating. Not the cargo boats, the work scow was still going up and down, not the cargo boats. So, yeah, very, where you were in history of the canal. All right, river crossing. So I talked about this relationship the canal had with rivers. It drew water off the rivers. It used the rivers to dump excess water to keep the canal at 5 feet. And there are many times when there are river crossings, you had to cross it. Both these photos are Waterloo Village, that's a Musconetcon river. It takes three things for a boat to cross the river. First, you need a mule bridge for the mule and Thunderhill. That's pretty simple. You need what's called a guard lock. The guard lock's main purpose was to control the water going from the river into the canal. You can't just have it open with too much water flooding. And then you need a dam. Dam allows slack water, see the slack water here, to be very hard to pull boat against the current. So we deal a lot of the organization is kind of similar to you, as in Musconetcon Watershed Association, MWA. So we have a very good partnership with them. They're actually speaking on our next program meeting on the 21st. And the MWA, what are they doing? They're removing dams all up and down the Musconetcon River. So we heard this a few years ago. I called Alan Hunt, the executive director, and I said, "Oh, I hear you moved all these dams. That's really good, but you're not touching the Waterloo Dam and you're not touching the Saxon Falls anymore." And he's like, No, we're not touching that. So, yeah, we support the removal of dams as long as they're not Morris Canal dams, and we don't support. So that would be our relationship if we had the Whippany
Is that
River.
because they're failing for the fish? What's the purpose
So
of?
the purpose of removing dams, it's just basically return, as you probably know, returning the nature, returning a river to how it was naturally is the best thing. But yeah, the shad population, migrating fish can't go upstream here. All right, I mentioned how the boats cross the Delaware River 2 places. Easton and Phillipsburg and New Hope to Lambertville. How do you get across the Delaware? It's too big a river to do, yeah. They did it a different way. They actually utilized the current to get across. So in those 2 places, there are cables strung across the river. The boats would attach themselves to the cable, and by pushing the bow downstream, the current would take it across. And that's what this illustration shows. That's east in the background. That's where the Lehigh Canal came down, and this boat is making its way across to Phillipsburg, where it will start its journey on Morris Canal across the state. It worked the same way with New Hope to Lambertville, the DNR Canal. Sometimes the boats, sometimes the rivers ran above the canal. I'm sorry, reverse that. The canal ran higher than the river, and in that case, they used aqueducts. And these are the 2 most notorious aqueducts. One at the top is the one at Lincoln Park. It connects Lincoln Park, Morris County to Passaic Township, or Wayne Township on the Passaic County side. And then this was the Little Falls Aqueduct. That was the biggest man-made object on the Morris Canal. Huge aqueduct. What's here today? Well, they're all both gone. Lincoln Park, you just see little abutments on the side of the river there. And in Little Falls, the Morris Canal Park, they actually have a water line that goes across from the aqueduct. Keep this image in your mind. We'll see it again at the end. I tell you a little bit about boats. The gentleman asked, were they flat bottom? Yes, they were flat bottom boats. The canal was 5 feet deep. Fully loaded, the boats drew about 4.5 feet of water. Empty boats drew less than a foot. And they were 2 hinge sections, each 45 feet long. So together they were 91 feet long, 10.5 feet wide. Why were they hinged? Because of the inclined planes. As the boat went over the top of the plane, it had to be then, otherwise the keel would fit. So they were hinged together. Most of the boat was cargo hold.
Did they have to invent a hinge boat also, or was that?
I don't know if that was the first place hinge boat was used, but yeah. I mean, probably they at some point strung different sections of boat together before that. Yeah.
Why do they have to have that arch to get over the inclined plane? Like, why not just join it?
Oh, because
Like, at some point you have to get off.
you're going to hill, when you're going up the plane, You have to go over it to get it. I mean, if you didn't have a hill at the top of the plane, the water would just run down the
Yeah.
plane. So you have to contain the water
Okay.
out of the canal.
It's
So
gotta come up above.
you have to come up and then down into the water. So this is a good photo, no good photo, shows a boat in the lock. First of all, it shows what a tight fit it is. This is a light boat, so you see how high it is. So it gives us a very good perspective. First of all, steering systems here. This is why we call it a boat rather than a barge. In fact, Morris Canal enthusiasts like the wood barge is like nails on a blackboard. No, it's a boat. But it was navigated, it was steered, it had a tiller blade and it had a rudder and it had a rope connecting. The rope was so you could adjust the rudder depending on how high or low the boat is. And it's just this little 10x10 cabin in the back here. That's where the canal happened and the driver slept and his family was there. Every boat was numbered, that's how they kept track of tolls. And they have a water barrel here, for fresh water, all washing was done from the canal water. But this was your, potable water came from the springs. Navigation took a minimum of 2 people, the captain steered the boat and the, driver kept the mules going. Usually a young man was hired unless the captain had children, could be then a son or a daughter, kept the mules moving along. There's a photo of a mule driver, a young man, mules pulling the boat out of a lock. That's a Plain Ford West at a place called Giddy Hollow, and they had to walk 20 miles a day. The canal operated every day except Sunday, so 20 miles a day, 6 days a week, if you were mule family, that's what you would do. You would also be in charge of the mules, so you would get up an hour before the captain, get the mule harnessed and fed and watered and brushed and all that, and then at the end of the day, you would have to get the mule unharnessed, fed into the stables out up and down the canal. This is a really good photo of life on the canal boat. There's a woman, she's in the hinges, which is the biggest place in the boat where you have the most deck space. There's the captain in the background steering, and she's cooking on an open stove. She also has laundry hanging out to dry. There's a shopping basket which goes in the stores. If you ever go down to Dreadlock Park, down in Stewartsville, there's a full-size replica canal boat down there. So you can walk on the deck and go down the deck. That's what I did last Sunday at History Trail, Warren County History Trail. I was dressed up as a canal boat captain. Another woman, I volunteered with Melinda, she was the wife, and you could have come down and seen us do things like this. Captain typically rented his boat from the Morris Canal Banking Company. He was responsible for the upkeep. Here you can see they're repairing a leak in the hull. Since inclined planes were used, they provided like a dry dock. You can stop the cradle at the top of the plane as they do repairs. That's also where you can give the mules some feeds. Is kind of something you have to do. The captain he rented the boat, but he had to provide the mules. So you had to get a team of mules if you wanted to be a canal boat captain. The team of mules cost $150. That's a lot of money back then. So you had to save up. And of course, you kept your mules, treat them very well because they were your bread and butter. They were your motor. You always had to have mule feed on board. There were 2 big mule feed boxes. You would feed your mules before you fed yourself because that was kind of like your, keeping gas in the car. And captains were judged on how well they kept their mules, and he used to be very proud captain with his team of mules there. So what killed the Morris Canal? Well, pretty easy guess. Trains did. It took a canal boat 5 days to get across the state. Or it takes a train about 5 hours. So from about the 1870s on, there was a slow progression of more trains taking over the canal business till early in the 20th century. Trains had taken over completely. Now, I mentioned that the Morris Canal Banking Company is not a financial success. one thing that kept it going the last few decades. 1872, the Lehigh Valley Railroad leased out all the canal property. Now is a source of income that kept the canal going. Why did they want it? Well, what they were really looking at is this piece of land here. Does anyone recognize what that is, what it is today?
Okay.
No, it's right across from the lower Manhattan.
Liberty State Park?
Liberty State Park, very good. That was all owned originally by the Morris Canal Banking Company. This basin here, which is called Morris Canal Basin today, it's where they stored the boats in the winter because it didn't freeze out. This was what the Lehigh Valley Railroad had their eyes on. Very valuable property. Look at all this is early 20th, all these rail lines here, all these ship piers, right across, you're right in New York Harbor, across from lower Manhattan. That's what they wanted to acquire, and they did. They leased it out up until the abandonment. Then they acquired this. Everything else went to the state, but this became the property of the Lehigh Valley Railroad. So that's why they did that. Now, in later years, when the cargo boats were no longer running, the canal was used for different purposes. Here in Lake Opakon, there were launches that met the trains at the train station, Lake Opakon, and they transported vacationers up to the resorts around Lake Opakon. So that was kind of just another use that the canal was used right before it was abandoned. So our story started with a man named George McCullough. It's going to end with a man named Hudson Maxim, and both the beginning and the end of Morris Canal involves the Lake Opakon. Hudson Maxim was a very wealthy landowner, owned lots of land on the western side of Lake Opakon. When the cargo traffic dried up in the early 20th century, and the canal no longer had any use, there was a 10 to 15-year period where it's just kind of hanging out and trying to determine what to do with it. One of the ideas they had is let's use the canal as a water source to feed water to the cities in the east. Hudson Maxim didn't like that idea at all, because it's one thing if you're just keeping the canal at a certain level for navigation. If you're constantly drawing water off it, that's going to really take a lot more water. And his fear is that would cause Lake Opakon level to be depleted. At that point, Lake Opakon was a big resort. It was the biggest freshwater resort, still is, in New Jersey. So he wanted to protect it. So he led the battle to abandon the canal. He wrote lots of reports, he attended meetings, he wanted that canal abandoned. And he got his way. So remember that picture of that big aqueduct in Little Falls?
Yeah.
Well, the first thing they did blew it up.
Oh,
Dynamite. And so 2 years ago, last year rather, was the 100th anniversary of the abandonment. There's a book out there if you're interested in reading about it. Robert Gall's Disappearing Act, and that was all about the canal abandonment. Very good book. But say it's been 200 years now since the canal started, and 100 years it's abandonment. So today we have what's called the Morris Canal Greenway. So this is kind of restored a lot of the canal parts, or preserving, restoring, developing trails, developing protecting the assets. This is UForce Park, which I mentioned. There's part of the totally restored lock. There's part of the water canal. Very few sections of canal, Morris Canal water. But if you're interested in checking some of these places out, go to our website, canalsocietyNJ.org, and we have trail brochures there.
Did lots of the property end up in private hands?
Yes, well, most of it, a lot of it's in private hands. Some of it are roadways, like JFK Drive, part of the canal. Part of the Route 80 go through Patterson is on the canal. The Newark subway system is on the canal. And a lot of it is public, especially out where I am in Warren County area, is public land. So all the trail brochures that you see here are publicly accessible, and we only promote what's legal, or here, we don't say, go on some property, so there is quite a bit that is publicly, accessible. And that's my presentation, again, there's my email, if you want to email, any questions come to you. Our website, all kinds of photos, maps, information on both the canals in New Jersey, DNR and Morris Canal, and if you, on Facebook, you can like our Facebook page, and that's where we promote a lot of upcoming events, like our upcoming program meeting, other canal related events, and so on. So, question, yes?
So did the canal operate all year round?
No.
I'm imagining, okay, so what, in the winter, what happened?
So first of all, the canal operated unless it was frozen over.
Right.
We do have photos of the boats running when it's snowing on the ground. So they would be running in the middle of summer, 90 degrees, they'd be running. Once the canal froze over, they couldn't run. So at that point, the boats were moved to Jersey City. That big canal basin that we saw at Liberty State Park, that's where they were, that's where they stored. Now, how do they make money off the canal in the
Yeah.
winter?
Right.
There are many places where there are basins, which are big areas that, boats were stored where boats can turn. You couldn't turn the canal because the canal is 40 feet wide, boats are 91 feet long. Couldn't do a U-turn, so you need a basin to turn. Any big town population area basins where you could stop overnight on Sunday. So what was those basins were used for in the winter was ice cutting. Back then, there was no refrigeration, no electricity, so we went in ice box. Ice cutting was a real big business. They cut the ice, they stored it in big ice houses that kept it cold throughout the year. Now, here's something interesting, Laker Pack on big ice cutting operation, had 3 big ice houses there. One of them burned, big fire, and huge thing, huge whip, 100 stacks of ice. Burned to the ground. We have pictures of it. The whole structure is burned, it survived the ice. You see all the stacks of ice totally tried, but they're there. That's how well they work. Yeah.
Aside from coal and people, what else do they transport?
No, well, they transported coal, they transported iron ore, because that's what the coal was being taken through. Other than that, everything, they transported lumber, they transported, produce, they transported, sawdust, they transported manure. People always ask, what about, most of the cargo went west east. What came back west? Well, in cities, you have lots of horses. Horses produce lots of manure. They need that in farms out west. So that was the east to west cargo. They transported liquor, beer, kegs of beer. So basically anything, but there's a whole long list of things. And each cargo had a different toll. So what would happen is you would have a bill of lading, how many tons of a cargo you have. There's 5 cents per ton, 2 cents per ton, and then that's what you end up paying as a toll to use the.
Are there actual tolls or do you just pay the company?
You would pay the toll when you first entered the canal at Phillipsburg. You would pay the toll to enter the canal. Then every lock and inclined plane, there is a toll to use that. So that's how the Morris Canal Banking Company would make their money through tolls. For a boat captain, you're basically like an independent trucker. Your mules were your capital expense. You had to pay your tolls, you had to pay for mule feed, those are your operating expenses, and then, the rest was profit. Or whatever.
You said they only made a profit for a short while.
That's
100 years.
That's the Morris Canal Banking Company, only made a profit for 30 years, but I'm talking about the profit that the canal captains would make. But they did
How
not,
did it keep going if it was only profitable that short?
well, there's a lot of companies that operate at a loss.
Yes,
Um,
not forever.
they had to keep going because the canal was needed.
Yeah.
So it was, a necessity, so, they just continued operating at a loss, but when Lehigh, the peak was in the 1860s, and then the 1870s. that's when Lehigh Valley Railroad started leasing the land, so that helped, you know. So,
We just went on a canal boat ride up on the Erie Canal this year. It was the 250th anniversary.
200.
200. And we we rented a canal boat and
Oh, right.
rode it ourselves and everything. So we were on there for like 4 days. So this is really interesting to me. And one of the things, just think about how much money it made or didn't make. They said the Erie Canal paid itself off in the first year.
Wow.
Yeah, that's
So,
successful.
I guess it was like a much bigger scale.
Oh, yeah, well, just comparing the two New Jersey canals, the Morris Canal and the Delaware River. The Morris Canal, they designed for a specific purpose, and that was transporting cargo. So the boats were a very specific design. And the locks, the inclined planes, the bridges were all designed only for that boat. So for example, if you go down to DNR, you know, it's not only is the canal much bigger and the locks much bigger, but all the road bridges open down. That's because the DNR had all types of boats. They had steam launches, they had tugs, they had big schooners, they had all kinds of boats running, and they made a lot of money. The Morris Canal only had the cargo boats. None of the bridges were able to open. They were just made high enough for those flat bottom boats to sneak under. So once that cargo traffic dried up, there really was no use for the canal. So that was the difference. Erie Canal was a whole other, that was a huge, I mean, you go through the locks there,
Yeah.
huge,
Yeah,
huge
it was
locks. Yeah, so that was just built at a much bigger scale too.
So how do they accommodate the traffic coming the other way? Like, how did you coordinate that? Like, they had certain pull-off points where it got wide, but how?
How would two boats go like that?
Yeah.
Okay, so the canal was 40 feet wide,
Oh.
the boats were 10.5 feet wide. So they had no problem fitting. Now, the question is, if you have a tow path on one side and you got mules pulling the boat, how do they coordinate that when you have a mule, you know, tow line path? The way it would work is whichever was the heavier boat, which was typically the one going east and was lower in the water, it would go to the opposite side of the canal from the tow path. It would drop its tow line down in the water.
Wow.
Then the lighter boat, which was up higher, would then glide over. So that, yeah, that's how the operation works.
So when you said they only had 3 inches on either side, that was in a lot,
A lot,
right?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, not the canal.
So
No,
they
the canal
just
was
took turns on the lot.
40 feet. When we refer to a canal, we refer to it as a prism. That's the lot, the canal went like this and then down like that and that. So the boats couldn't go all the way to the sides, they had to stay somewhat in the middle. So that's why when you see a boat stop for the night, it's not right up against bank, it's a little bit out. They had to have gangplanks across to get out.
Most of the banks were grass or rocks on the side, not like walls.
Well, if it was flat land, then they would just earth it.
Yeah.
With it, and the canal is clay line. If you had steep embankment on either side, then they would have rock walls, that's called drip trap. So if you go like out where I am, where there's a lot of it still preserved, you see a lot of places in the canal where you have those stone walls still there. Which is called drip trap, and that's the kind of retaining the big steep walls.
I live on the Rockaway River and the
Okay.
Morris Canal went right.
Which town?
Boone Township,
Oh, yeah,
yeah, so and
at Power Mill, where you
so
live.
I've lived there 26 years and we always find random pieces of coal.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, no,
Wow.
Yeah,
I-
right, yeah.
Wow.
And it's just, you know, we've lived there so long and we've cleared a little area by the river and so we always think, well, we're never gonna see another piece again and then
Oh,
there'll just be a piece, just show up, I don't know where it comes
Yes,
from. or-
I developed, a partner of mine and I developed a, part of the trail in Rockport last, winter. And we were just finding coal, I had a big pile on the side of it.
Wow, oh, it's not that much.
And I put a sign, Morris Canal coal, and
Oh.
every time I go there, there's fewer and fewer pieces, people are taking souvenirs and. But yeah, you find it everywhere. One of the things they did, you know, people said, why would they be in a towpath? one of the things that was popular back then was kids would take old tin cans and they would put it on a token. And then the captains would become, they'd be bored, so they would pick, they, you know, a whole big thing called, they'd pick up pieces of coal and try to knock off the tin cans. And then what the kids would do is they'd come with
Yeah,
pans,
it's the goal.
get the coal, fill it, they either take it home to help heat their house if they're like poor, or they would take it to a store and say, hey, I'll trade you for some candy. It's supposed to be-
Right.
So that's, yeah, there's, you find a lot of coal.
So this canal was privately owned then?
Yes, probably.
So there was no government funding? Like.
No.
Now.
No, that's what George McCullough wanted the state to own it, but the state wouldn't own it, so.
But same, what about the DNR?
They don't say anything, private company, yeah,
Oh,
that's it. Now, the reason, you know, people ask, and this is ironic, why is the DNR, because you go down to the DNR, it's all water, it's all still there. Why is it still there in the Morris Canal? It's not. The reason the DNR still exists because it's currently being used as a water source. This DNR water company. It's a state park. You can ride your bike or walk or paddle, but it is being provided as a water source. The reason the Morris Canal was abandoned was that it was not used as a water source. So one existed because it is water source, the other doesn't exist, so it wasn't a water source.
when I went to the Washington Crossing, they have DNR.
Yeah, DNR goes right through
And I
the.
think, I don't know if it's on the Pennsylvania side too, just on the Jersey side.
Well, the New Jersey side, you have the DNR canal.
Yeah,
On the Pennsylvania side, you have the Delaware Canal.
yeah,
But it's not, in the Jersey side, the canal's right next to the river.
yeah,
On the Penn, you have to go a little bit away from the river to get, because
yeah.
that's a popular bicycling place. You can bicycle down the Jersey side, go over and then back up the Pennsylvania
Yeah, it's a
side.
rail trail.
Yeah, well,
Well, part of the
Tow
DNR is,
path.
yeah, well, yeah,
but, yeah, same thing, really.
yeah.
But, you know, the reason that's popular is because it's, like, if you do the main canal, DNR, you can only go up and back. There you can go one side down and the other side up, so you see something different on the way back. Because that's a popular place to cross over, is Washington Cross.
So in Phillipsburg, what was on the other side in Pennsylvania? Another canal?
Lehigh Canal, the Lehigh, back to, yeah, so the, here's Marchonk, that's, Jim Thorpe. This is the Lehigh, it's called Lehigh Navigation Canal. It came down to Easton. Now, Easton, it connects up to the Delaware River. It also connects up to what's called the Delaware Division of the Pennsylvania Canal. So here the boats could either go across the Delaware to Phillipsburg to connect to the Morris Canal, or then go down the Delaware Division to get to the DNR. Now, what this map doesn't show is it's actually a feeder canal that goes to the New Jersey side from Bull's Eye, right about there. So you would come down, cross over New Hope to Lambertville, then go down the feeder to the Delaware and then cross. So the bike trails here today, by the way, if you're into biking, go to the DNR Canal website. They actually have a chart with all the different loops. You can bicycle down the DNR path on the Jersey side, cross over and go up there to the Delaware Canal.
That empties at Perth Amboy? Is that Perth Amboy at the end, or Staten Island?
Over here,
No,
that's, well, it empties into the Raritan River,
okay,
but close to the mouth of, the Raritan Bay, so yeah, that kind of area. So it allowed access to the Delaware River, which access the Delaware Bay, which then could access, lower, New York Harbor.
Any idea how many different landowners had to sell their land to them?
There's a lot, there's a book, if you really wanna dig into that, what I call the Bible of the Morris Canal, was a book written in the eighties, it's called, 100 Years and 100 Miles. Written by Barbara Claus, and she wrote this tremendous book, it's like, you know, this thick, and that goes into all the different land, acquisitions had to make across the states that, to get it and, all the challenges and so on, so. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but I know it was a lot of, it wasn't easy, to acquire it all.
I just have one more question. You said that people came from all over the world to learn about the design of, what was it? The,
Incline plan.
right, so were there patents back then? Like, was it patented? Did they make money from selling that? Did they sell the
I-
design? I mean,
no,
did you
not-
share it?
Not that I've heard, I think it was just they
Did
came,
you share?
looked at it and, said, oh, okay, try this.
Today it would be money.
Yeah, you probably, I don't think that really happens, it's back then.
Yeah, just curious.
Well, as we learned on the Erie Canal, they went out to England to learn everything from there.
Yeah,
To figure out how to build the Erie Canal.
yeah, most things with canals, we learned from, Europe or Asia, and this was kind of the one thing that the other parts of the world learned from us, and, so that's.
So who developed the lock system? I thought that was done from the Erie Canal. Was that a?
I think locks go back before the United States,
Okay.
started developing, I think there's,
Assume
I think they predate.
I assume the Mesopotamia.
Just reiterate, you talked about like, if you tried to move the coal on land, it might take like 18 days, did you say, or?
No, it was really unfeasible to do it. You go back there, back in those days, roads were just dirt paths. I mean, like if you're walking on a little trail in the woods today, that would be what is a road, it won't be a roadway back then. So to transport large cargo, you need like horses and a big cart or oxen or something. First of all, you'd be very, very limited to how much cargo you could transport. Plus, you hit, trees down and potholes and you hit mud. Now, if you're on a horse can go through anything. So back then, the horses were very efficient for people to travel on, but pulling large cargo, they were not. Now, water, you could put, a lot of people say, well, Jay, it's so cruel, these two mules had to pull a big heavy canal boat. Pulling things on water is actually very easy. Once you get it going, it moves very easily. So that was the solution back then. If you have a waterway transporting large cargo on water, you could do it very easily. Pulling things on land, something big and heavy just wasn't efficient at all. That's why it made, went from canals to trains and then, eventually the highways. We built this big system of highway. But what the 18 hours, what you're talking about is, that was if they used flights of locks to overcome the large change in elevation as opposed to inclined plane. Which what I even say to you is to go up an inclined plane was somewhere between 10 and 15 minutes. So that example I gave, a 90-foot change elevation, an hour and a half using flight locks.
Yeah.
10, like say 12 minutes for inclined plane. That was the difference then.
And
And
that
I was
worked.
just thinking about the progress of going from land to canal to railroads. I was thinking of what were all those time amounts that you said, and I guess it was impossible on land. And then was it like 5 days, or how long did it take?
It was, as I said, it was actually easier to ship cargo across the Atlantic Ocean to bring it by land, so that was kind of infeasible. Yeah, then you went to canal, and that was 5 days across the state. So, still really slow, but at least you have a solution to transport the cargo across the state. Then you went to railroads like 5 hours across the state. So railroads were, huge, I mean, that's why, railroad industry went crazy, they were putting tracks everywhere and, all these huge, rail companies and so on.
Yeah.
And for many years, railroads, how they transport cargo. They still do today, I mean, rails, still much in use, not as much as back then, but, there was still a lot being transported by rail. And then eventually, like today, mostly highways, all the semis on Route 80, 78, and so on, just, how things usually. So,
So Lake Apacon's a high point for both east and west.
yes. Yeah, and the way, every canal and every lock is numbered. And the way the numbering works is you start at Lake Apacon as the starting point. And it goes down east side, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way to Jersey City. Then it goes down the west side, 1, west 2, west 3, west. So every lock kind of plane is like a number and either east or west. So.
Very interesting.
Yeah, also about Lake Patcon, it said, it started to be, it initially was called Musconetcong Pond.
Well, it had a number of different, the name Hepatcon predates the canal, that goes way, way, way back to, 18th century. It's, I think the translation is, pipe water or something like that. It had numbered, it's also Drake Pond. Some maps say Great Pond and Little Pond. Then the one I have, this is the one I used here, which was, Musconetcong Pond. It's a source, Lake Apacon today is the source of the Musconetcong River. So it was feeding the river, from 12,000 years ago. The canal, was developed about 200 years ago. So what the microphone, had a number of different names.
So is there a Lake Musconetcong
Yes.
today? There is a, okay,
Right,
but
that's-
it's not the same thing as whatever.
Now, that's completely man-made. Lake Apacon at least started out with the, body, thank you, body of water. Lake Musconetcon didn't exist at all, so man-made. In fact, what that was originally called was Stanhope Reservoir. Because that's what it was built for, as the reservoir in the Boyce Canal. Then over time it became they renamed it Lake Musconetcon. But yeah, it's one of 6 different reservoirs that they built. It's funny when you go back and look at an 18th century map. Northern New Jersey had very few inland waterways. In fact, one of the things, the largest natural lake that exists today in New Jersey is Bud Lake. Bud Lake's like tiny, it's like a pond. That was the largest one. You look at Northern New Jersey today, there's bodies of water everywhere, they're all reservoirs, most of them all were man-made. And, a lot of the ones that are far more recent, Merrill Creek and Round Valley, Spruce Run, those are all, mostly recently built reservoirs. So, there were very few inland waterways, that, before we started trading them.
That's fascinating, yeah.
That's-
Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Okay, we'll take a 5-minute break and we'll start our regular meeting. Thanks, Dan.
Oh, thank you.